is Tamsyn Alfino, and I am the author and creator of the Game Danger Grace and the Big Five Feeling series. I'm a clinical social worker, and I am currently in private practice, having been a school counselor for about 10 years. I found that working with kids is definitely my passion, and moving into private practice now, I've been able to work with kids, teens, and adults, which has definitely been something that I am enjoying phenomenally. But the last 5 years has been an absolute highlight for me, working on the Game Ranger Grace and the Big Five Feeling series. Being such a well-known and respected brand, I obviously jumped at the opportunity. Initially, I sent out my book, and when Butterfly came back to me and said, we're interested, I I honestly thought I was being scammed, because I mean, it's Butterfly, right? And I'm me, so what are the chances that this is real? In terms of everything that Butterfly stands for, and just the products that are available to kids, I use their products myself. I've been using them for years, so um, being able to work with a brand that's mission and vision in terms of nurturing and inspiring young minds, it's a dream come true, in the sense that knowing also that my books are going to be so accessible and available everywhere. I absolutely love that. My books are going to be able to reach so many kids, who hopefully will find the Game Ranger Grace and the Big Five Feeling series to be just as wonderful, and versatile and helpful and inspiring, as all of the other Butterfly products are. I was a school counselor for a couple of years at that point, and part of my working within a school was to develop emotional intelligence, or EQ lessons, right? And this was quite a novel concept. And to date, I'm still super proud of the fact that I was involved in such an original initiative at the school, developing EQ lessons, because the idea was that kids are at school to learn to read, to learn to write, to learn to count, but emotional intelligence is a skill. It's not something that comes naturally. It's not something that comes automatically. We need to teach it. It needs to be taught, just like everything else that kids learn is taught. So being able to contain, identify, express their emotions is something that they need to be taught to do in the same way as they are taught everything else. And so the EQ lessons were kind of geared towards that, focusing on developing emotional skills. And one of the lessons I did, I decided to play a game in which, I took I went on to call them the Big Five Feelings, but essentially the five primary feelings we have are fear, anger, disgust, sadness, and joy. And those are actually five primary feelings based on a valid psychological principle concept that exists. Some say that there's actually six, and that surprise factors into that as well. But most psychological theories will leave that the sixth one out and work with the primary five. Also, we don't have the big six animals here in South Africa, so I kind of went with the five. And the game that I created, I asked the kids to divide into groups, and I took these five primary feelings and made cards, with each of them printed on it. And then I went and found other feelings that kind of fell under or into the category of these five. And so the game involved me just mixing up all the other little feelings, and putting them into piles in these five groups. And the kids then had to kind of run around trying to match each of the other feelings that they had, which were all mixed up in a bunch, with one of the big five feelings. Which one did they match with? And I kept saying the big five feelings, the big five feelings. And as I said that maybe for the 50th time during that lesson, I was like, hold the phone. I'm onto something here. I can do something with this. The big five feelings. And yeah, Cambridge Grace and the big five feelings concept was essentially born that day. And yeah, so that was the initial start of the idea. And I then went on to create the Game Ranger first, and essentially wrote pretty much all five of the stories 5 years ago. But the process of actually getting the books illustrated and kind of going through printing and fundraising, it's been a journey. It's been a journey, but the idea I knew was always that there were going to be, five primary emotions, five animals experiencing one of those primary emotions, and that the Game Ranger Grace essentially serves as like the school counselor of the bush, helping everybody to just process, work through, understand, and essentially just normalize everything that they were feeling and going through as being part of the human experience. And yeah, that was essentially what I believed the concept would be based on, and that it was necessary for kids, especially in terms of just developing their emotional intelligence and getting them to understand and see and appreciate that all emotions need to be experienced, and also they need to be taught the skills to be able to deal with them. Rhyme. What kids don't love a rhyme? I mean, I knew from the get-go that the stories would need to be rhyming stories, because I've always had a love of poetry, and writing poetry is something that, I mean, if you were to ask my family, they'll tell you, like, everybody's birthday, everybody's special occasion is Tamsyn with some sort of poem-related presentation, and so rhyming and poetry was always my thing. So I knew that my stories were going to rhyme. The funny thing is that to date, I've yet to have a single story reading where I actually go and read for kids where I don't have the situation where I'm maybe 2 pages in, and a little hand will go up and I'll be like, yeah, you have a question? What do you want to ask? And it'll be something along the lines of, the story rhymes. Or did you know it's a rhyming story? And I can't help but laugh as I respond. I'm like, wow, yeah, look at that. Who would have thought? I did not notice that while writing it. Kids are the best. But yeah, the rhyming is always something that's going to be a hit, and kids love it, and so that's instant appeal. And then the other thing is relatability. Every single one of the stories, even though not necessarily directly, relatable in the sense of the actual specific event happening in the book itself, within the story, every story can be related to on some level. So for example, with Batu, for example, your child may not necessarily have a fear of making mistakes, but they can relate to the experience of fear itself. There is something that they are fearful of, and so the story is something that can be related to them. Equally with all five of the books, there's something that each and every child can relate to in some or other way within each of those stories. So rhyming and relatability are what I focused on in terms of making these books appealing and fun, and also short, sweet, but sensitive was key. I worked with 5-year-olds. The science doesn't lie when they say that concentration is kind of an age-related thing. So if you're dealing with 5-year-olds, expect 5 minutes of sustained concentration, and then you're kind of starting to push the boundaries. So the idea was to keep the stories short, sweet, and sensitive, so that the message gets across in a way that doesn't bore, and actually can be read over and over and over. And the idea is that these books are for extension. So I will often have parents or teachers ask me, what age is this book or these books appropriate for? And I say, I can give you a rough estimation if you really wanted to. But I believe that reading is something that should start, in the womb, if possible. I mean, there is no age minimum when it comes to reading, because the words themselves don't necessarily need to be understood until later. But the bonding, the interaction, the connection of reading stories with your children, or with children, is in itself amazing. And what I found is that the younger children are, when they are exposed to the kinds of emotional vocabulary or feeling words that are in these stories, the younger they are when they get exposed to that, the younger they are when they start using them. So yes, I've heard a 6-year-old talk about being thrilled, or being overjoyed. And whenever I hear a child using words that I know are not typical for their age, my first question is always, "Are you a reader?" And usually they are. And so, the younger they are when they start reading these books, the more emotionally intelligent they will be as they get older. I suppose, if I was to think about when I started writing these stories, what I'd hoped my thinking was in terms of what the takeaway would be. Um, Essentially helping kids to understand that our feelings are essentially rainbows, and that there's more to what you feel than just sad, angry, or happy. There's more than just three feelings in the rainbow. And by helping them to name what those feelings are, it means it gives them the ability to verbalize more than just happy, sad, or angry. And also to distinguish the difference, because feeling rejected by your friends is not the same as feeling lost, um, that you don't, um, or feeling left out, that you don't get invited to a party. They are essentially little windows into our experience of ourselves. And the younger we are when we are taught to switch off, or block out, or stop looking into those windows, um, the more problems we set ourselves up for later. So helping children to understand that, even the feelings that we experience as being bad, because they don't make us feel good, doesn't mean that they aren't good for us, because they tell us something about what's going on, and they tell us what we need to do in response. So when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel distressed, when you feel angry, that is telling you something about yourself. You need to do something to feel better. We all kind of need to be a little grace if we can, because that's what kids need. They need somebody that's going to be in their corner, allowing them to feel their feels, allowing them to know that having big feelings is not a bad thing, and that we will be there to support them, encourage them, and help them to understand those feelings, um, and then regulate the behavior that stems from those feelings a little bit better once we can understand what it is that those feelings, those windows, are essentially trying to tell us.